Think of an empress. The word itself conjures images of marble halls and silken gowns, of absolute power whispered in hushed tones. You imagine a woman born into a gilded cage, raised from birth to rule, her every move a calculated display of divine right. You think of noble blood, of pristine lineage, of a dignity so profound it seems untouchable. Now, forget all of it. Erase the marble halls, erase the silk, and erase the lie of noble birth. Because the woman who would become the most powerful empress in the half-forgotten history of the Byzantine Empire wasn't born to a throne. She was born in the shadow of one, in the stench and filth of the bear pits that served the city's unquenchable thirst for spectacle. You think that to become an empress, you need a noble family. Theodora had none. Her father was a bear keeper for the green faction of the Hippodrome, a man who died when she was a child, leaving her and her sisters destitute. You think you need a reputation of purity and virtue? Theodora, according to the court historian Procopius, was stripped of that before she was even a woman. History has a convenient way of forgetting the details it finds uncomfortable. It prefers its queen sanitized, their stories scrubbed clean for the textbooks. But to understand the iron will of the woman who would one day rule the Western world alongside her husband, you cannot meet her in the palace. You must meet her where she was made, on the squalid, debauched stage of the Constantinople Hippodrome. Procopius, in his infamous Secret History, a book written with a pen dipped in pure venom and hatred for the Empress, paints a picture so vile, so shocking, that for centuries scholars dismissed it as pure fantasy. He tells us that Theodora, as a young girl, couldn't yet play the flute or the harp, so she became a performer in the vile comedic mimes that passed for entertainment. But this wasn't theater. It was a public spectacle of human degradation. He describes in excruciating detail her most notorious performance, a grotesque parody of the myth of Leda and the Swan. In front of tens of thousands of screaming citizens, she would lie on her back, almost naked, as servants scattered grains of barley across her body. Then a flock of specially trained geese would be released to pick the grains from her flesh, one by one. It was an act of calculated obscenity, a performance designed to be so unforgettable in its depravity that it would make her a star of the city's underworld. It's a horrifying image, a story of exploitation and abuse that should have, by all accounts, destroyed her. It should have left her as a broken footnote in the sprawling, brutal history of the Byzantine Empire. But what if I told you that it didn't? What if I told you that this public degradation, this calculated debasement, this nightmare existence in the brothels and back rooms of the world's most powerful city, wasn't her ruin? What if it was her forge? What if every leering nobleman, every violent heckler, every night spent surviving on her wits was a lesson? What if the Hippodrome stage and the high-class brothel were, in fact, the most brutal, unforgiving schools of statecraft that ever existed? A place where she learned lessons in human psychology, mass manipulation, and raw, untamed power that no pampered prince could ever hope to comprehend. This is not the story of how a prostitute became an empress. That's too simple. This is the story of how the most horrifying sexual practices of the Byzantine Empire didn't just create a survivor. They accidentally forged its most powerful empress. The traditional story of power is one of inheritance. A prince is taught statecraft in a sterile classroom, learning the theories of war and diplomacy from tutors who have never seen a battlefield. Theodora's education had no classroom, no tutors, and no theories. Her lessons were etched into her memory through humiliation, fear, and the daily, grinding necessity of survival. The underworld of Constantinople was her university, and its curriculum was the dark, unwritten art of power. Every horror she endured, every degradation she survived, was a master class that forged a specific and deadly skill she would later unleash from the throne of the Byzantine Empire. Her first lesson was the psychology of the mob. On the stage of the Hippodrome, Theodora faced a beast with 50,000 heads. She performed not to a quiet, respectful audience, but to a roaring, drunken, violent mass of humanity. This was a crowd that could turn in an instant. One moment they are cheering you, the next they are throwing stones. To survive that stage, let alone to thrive on it, required a sixth sense. She had to learn to read the subtle shifts in the crowd's mood, to feel the collective pulse of their joy, their rage, their boredom. She learned what kind of humor could disarm them, what kind of audacity could mesmerize them, and what kind of vulnerability could make them feel like her protectors. She understood, in a way no emperor cocooned in his palace ever could, that the mob is not a mindless force. It is a collection of individual fears and desires, magnified into a singular, terrifying entity. She learned that to control it, you don't fight it with logic. You seduce it with spectacle. This wasn't a theory. For her, it was a practical skill, honed night after night, performance after performance. It was the skill that would one day allow her to stare down a city in flames and not even flinch, because she had been staring into the heart of that same beast since she was a child. Her second lesson was the anatomy of male ambition. In the brothels and private parties of Constantinople's elite, Theodora was not just an object of desire. She was a student of human weakness. The most powerful men in the empire, senators, generals, wealthy merchants, came to her not just for her body, but to let down their guard. In these moments of manufactured intimacy, men reveal themselves. They confess their ambitions, expose their rivalries, and betray their deepest fears. Theodora was a silent witness to it all. She had to become an expert in the fragile male ego. She learned that a man who projected immense strength in the Senate could be crippled by insecurity in the bedroom. She learned that a man's desire for a woman was often intertwined with his desire for status, for rebellion, for a momentary escape from the rigid structures of his life. She learned how to be whatever they needed her to be: a daughter, a mother, a goddess, a confidant. She mastered the art of making powerful men feel like they were in control, even as she was subtly steering their thoughts and actions. This was a dangerous psychological dance. She was cataloging their secrets, mapping their networks of influence, and learning the precise levers of flattery, shame, and desire that could make them move. This intimate knowledge of the powerful men who ran the empire gave her an advantage that was almost absolute. When she later entered the court as Justinian's wife, she wasn't meeting these men for the first time. She already knew their secrets. Her third, and perhaps most crucial lesson, was the power of the unseen network. The world of the infames, the actresses, prostitutes, and criminals, was a society within a society. Ostracized by the formal structures of power, they built their own. They had their own codes, their own hierarchies, and their own methods of survival. In this world, information was currency, and loyalty was life itself. Theodora learned the value of building alliances not with the powerful, but with the powerless. She knew the whispers of the brothel workers, the gossip of the bathhouse attendants, the secrets passed between stagehands. She understood that the people who are invisible to the powerful see everything. This was a network built not on money or titles, but on shared experience and mutual desperation. They looked out for each other because no one else would. When Theodora rose to power, she didn't forget this lesson. She didn't abandon her network. She weaponized it. As Empress, she established one of the most formidable intelligence-gathering operations the empire had ever seen, staffed not with nobles and officials but with people from her past. Dancers, eunuchs, and former prostitutes who were fiercely loyal to her. They were her eyes and ears in every corner of the city, bringing her information that the official state apparatus could never hope to obtain. She also became a fierce protector of women, establishing homes for former prostitutes and passing laws that gave women more rights in divorce and property ownership. This wasn't just charity, it was statecraft. She was solidifying a base of power rooted in the very people society had thrown away, a base that owed its allegiance to her and her alone. Finally, her education taught her the necessity of absolute, pragmatic ruthlessness. The underworld has no room for sentimentality. It is a world of transactions, betrayals, and brutal consequences. Theodora witnessed firsthand what happened to those who were too trusting, too hesitant, or too merciful. She learned that survival is not a moral choice. It is a biological imperative. You do what you must to see the next sunrise. This stripped her of any romantic notions about human nature. She understood that power is not given, it is taken. She learned that sometimes, to prevent a greater catastrophe, you must be willing to commit a lesser evil without flinching. This wasn't a flaw in her character. In the brutal world of Byzantine politics, it was her greatest strength. It gave her a clarity of vision that her husband, Justinian, often lacked. While he could be swayed by tradition or religious dogma, Theodora saw the world for what it was, a relentless struggle for dominance. This cold, pragmatic realism, born from a life where every day was a fight, would be the very thing that saved their empire from complete annihilation. While others saw a crisis and debated the proper course of action, Theodora saw a threat and knew, instinctively, that the only response was to cut it out at the root, quickly and without regret. It was a lesson she had learned long ago. Hesitation is death. For 5 days the city burned. January 532 A.D. The beast of the Hippodrome, which Theodora had known her entire life, had finally broken its chains. What began as a typical post-race riot by the blue and green factions had mutated into something far more terrifying, a full-scale insurrection. The factions, mortal enemies for generations, had united under a single, chilling chant that echoed through the smoke-filled streets. Nika, conquer. Win. It was a declaration of war against the state, against the emperor himself. The city's prisons were thrown open. The great church of Hagia Sophia was a smoldering ruin. Senators, smelling weakness and opportunity, secretly backed the rebellion, crowning a new rival emperor. The palace was a besieged fortress, surrounded by a city that wanted its rulers dead. Inside, there was panic. Justinian, the emperor of the Romans, the man who dreamed of restoring the glory of the empire, was broken. His greatest generals, Belisarius and Mundus, men who had faced down barbarian hordes, advised him that the situation was hopeless. The army was wavering, the city was lost, and their only option was to flee. A ship was waiting in the harbor, loaded with treasure from the imperial vaults. Escape was not just possible, it was the only logical, rational choice. Justinian's advisors argued passionately for retreat. To stay meant certain death, a gruesome end at the hands of the mob they could hear baying for their blood right outside the palace walls. The decision was made. They would abandon the city, escape to the provinces, and hope to reconsolidate their power later. They would run. And then, a woman who the law had once deemed a non-person stood up to address a room full of the most powerful men in the world. And she did not speak. She performed. This was Theodora's moment. This was the culmination of every lesson she had ever learned. The imperial council room became her stage, and the terrified, indecisive men her final, most important audience. She looked at them, the emperor, the generals, the court officials, and she saw not rulers, but the same frightened, powerful men she had spent a lifetime learning to read and manipulate. She saw their fear, their wavering resolve, and she knew exactly which levers to pull. Her speech, as recorded by the historian Procopius, is one of the most powerful declarations in the annals of history. But it wasn't a plea for courage. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, delivered with the cold precision of a master strategist. She began by dismissing their logic. Whether or not a woman should give an example of courage to men is neither here nor there, she started, immediately neutralizing any prejudice against her gender. She was telling them to forget she was a woman and listen to the truth. She then addressed the core of their plan, escape. She conceded that it was a safe option, but then she reframed it not as a strategic retreat, but as an act of intolerable shame. For one who has been an emperor, she said, it is unendurable to be a fugitive. She was transforming a practical choice into a question of identity, of honor. She was reminding them what it meant to be Roman, to be an emperor. Then came the masterstroke. She made it personal, visceral. "May I never be separated from this purple," she declared, gesturing to the imperial robes, the ultimate symbol of their power. The color purple was strictly reserved for the emperor and empress. It was the color of royalty. And then she delivered the immortal line, the one that would echo through the centuries. The royal purple is the noblest shroud. Think about the sheer, breathtaking power of that statement. She took their greatest fear, death, and transformed it into their greatest honor. She told them that to die here, now, robed in the purple of their office, was a more glorious end than to live a long life in the disgrace of exile. She wasn't just appealing to their bravery, she was shaming their cowardice. She was presenting them with two choices: die as emperors or live as nobodies. For men whose entire identity was wrapped up in power and status, this was a devastatingly effective argument. She had read her audience perfectly. She knew that their egos were as important to them as their lives. This was not an emotional outburst. This was a calculated performance of a lifetime. This was the actress from the Hippodrome, reading the mood of the room, captivating her audience, and bending them to her will. This was the courtesan, understanding the fragile pride of powerful men and manipulating it to achieve her goal, and this was the survivor from the gutters of Constantinople, looking oblivion in the face and refusing to blink. She had faced down violent mobs before. This was just a larger stage. Her words fell like a thunderclap in the silent room. And they changed everything. A fire was lit in Justinian. Shamed and inspired, he turned to his generals. The plan to flee was abandoned. A new plan was forged, a plan of brutal, pragmatic ruthlessness that Theodora would have understood completely. General Belisarius was given the order. He took his loyal troops, sealed the exits to the Hippodrome where the mob was celebrating its victory, and unleashed a systematic slaughter. The sources say that over 30,000 people, men, women, and children, were cut down in a matter of hours. The rebellion was not just quashed, it was annihilated. The floors of the Hippodrome, where Theodora had once performed for the crowd's amusement, were now slick with their blood. The Nika riot was over. Justinian and Theodora's throne was secure. But let there be no mistake about who saved it. It was not the emperor who was ready to run. It was not the generals who had advised retreat. It was the former actress, the legal non-person, the woman from the brothel. On that day, she proved that she was not just Justinian's wife. She was his co-ruler, his strategist, and the iron spine of his empire. She had looked into the abyss of certain death and had turned it into her greatest victory, using the very skills the empire's horrifying underworld had taught her. She had saved her throne not in spite of her past, but because of it. And so the reign continued. For the next 2 decades, Theodora was not a silent partner, but a force of nature at the heart of the Byzantine Empire. She was a co-ruler in everything but name, her influence touching every aspect of imperial policy, from military campaigns to religious doctrine. She championed the rights of the downtrodden, built churches and convents, and her intelligence network was the envy and terror of her enemies. She had clawed her way from a state of legal non-existence to become one of the most powerful women the world had ever seen. The lessons learned in the darkness of the Hippodrome and the brothels had proven more valuable than any royal education could ever be. She had learned to read the mob, to manipulate the elite, to command loyalty from the forgotten, and to wield ruthlessness as a surgical tool. The horrifying world that created her had, in a final, ironic twist, made her the only person capable of mastering it. But history is rarely kind to women who seize power. It has a way of trying to force them back into the simple boxes it understands: saint or sinner, wife or whore. And Theodora's chief historian, Procopius, was a man who despised the box she had shattered. He served her and Justinian his entire life, writing the official, glowing histories of their wars and accomplishments. But in secret, he was writing another book, a book filled with rage, disgust, and a deeply personal hatred for the Empress he could not abide. He called it the Anecdota, or the Secret History. This was his revenge. In its pages, he meticulously documented every rumored depravity of her early life. He painted her not as a brilliant strategist, but as a conniving, insatiably lustful demon, a sorceress who had bewitched the emperor and corrupted the empire. He intended for this book to be his final, posthumous act of character assassination, the ultimate proof that this woman from the gutter was unworthy of the imperial purple. He wanted to use her past, specifically her sexual past, as a weapon to obliterate her legacy. And here lies the greatest irony of all. His attempt to destroy her is the very reason we know the true extent of her strength. His hate-filled chronicle, intended as a monument to her shame, accidentally became a testament to her incredible resilience. Without Procopius's secret history, we would have only the sanitized official version of a pious and serene empress. We would have no real understanding of the impossible odds she overcame. His venom-laced descriptions of her early life, meant to horrify us, instead reveal the depths of the abyss she climbed out of. He tried to define her by the degradation she suffered, but in doing so, he inadvertently showed us the raw materials from which she forged her indomitable will. The very weapon he forged to erase her memory is the reason her story remains so powerful and so unforgettable. The enemy who tried to bury her ended up ensuring her immortality. The story of Theodora is more than just a biography. It is a chilling case study in the nature of power, and in the way history is written by those who hold the pen. Why is it that for centuries the legacies of powerful women, from Cleopatra to Catherine the Great, have so often been attacked through the lens of their sexuality? Theodora's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that a woman's past, especially her sexual past, is often seen as a legitimate tool to diminish her accomplishments and question her authority. Her journey from the stage of the Hippodrome to the throne of the Byzantine Empire is a testament to the idea that strength is not always born from privilege. Sometimes it is forged in the very fires meant to consume it. The story of Theodora has been suppressed, debated, and sensationalized for over 1,500 years. But it is a story that refuses to be forgotten. If you believe that the buried histories of those who defied the expectations of their time deserve to be brought into the light, then join us on this journey. Subscribe, and let us know in the comments which historical figure you believe has been the most misunderstood or unfairly judged. Because history is full of powerful voices that have been silenced, and it is our mission to give them back their roar.